The emergency room's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps as I cradled my right arm against my chest, trying not to think about the sharp, stabbing pain that shot through it every time I moved. The nurse had given me something for the pain 20 minutes ago, but it hadn't kicked in yet. Or maybe it had, and this was just what a broken arm felt like, even with medication. I wouldn't know. In 43 years of life, I'd never broken a bone before. "Mrs. Catherine Morrison?" A doctor appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand, her expression professionally neutral. "Let's get you into X-ray." I stood up carefully, and that's when I saw her. My daughter, Melissa, 21 years old and supposed to be at college 3 hours away, was rushing through the emergency room entrance. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, her face flushed as if she'd been running. Behind her, holding her hand, was her husband of 6 months, Derek. "Mom!" Melissa's voice carried across the waiting room, and several people looked up. She practically ran to me, her eyes wide with concern. "Oh my God, Mom, are you okay? We got here as fast as we could." I opened my mouth to respond, but Derek spoke first. "What happened, Catherine?" His voice was smooth, concerned, the perfect son-in-law. He placed a hand on my good shoulder, his blue eyes searching my face. "Melissa said you fell." I hadn't told Melissa I fell. I hadn't told her anything, actually, just that I was at the hospital and had hurt my arm. My daughter's husband was already creating a narrative, already spinning the story before he'd heard it. "I need to get to X-ray," I said quietly, looking at the doctor who was waiting patiently. "We can talk after." "I'm coming with you," Melissa insisted, but the doctor shook her head. "Just the patient for now. You can wait here and we'll call you back once we have the results." As I followed the doctor down the sterile hallway, I could hear Melissa's voice behind me, high-pitched and worried, asking Derek what he thought had happened. I couldn't make out his response, but I could imagine it. Derek always had a response, always had an explanation, always had a way of making himself the hero of every story. The X-ray took 15 minutes, the confirmation of what I already knew. A clean break of my radius just above the wrist took another 10. The casting took 45 minutes, during which I stared at the pale blue fiberglass being wrapped around my arm and thought about how I was going to explain this to my daughter. Because I couldn't tell her the truth. The truth would break her heart. By the time I emerged from the treatment area, my arm in a cast from just below my elbow to my knuckles, Melissa and Derek were sitting in the waiting area. Melissa jumped up immediately. "Mom, what did they say?" "Broken," I said simply. "Clean break. 6 to 8 weeks in the cast." "Oh, Mom." Melissa wrapped her arms around me carefully, and I caught Derek watching us over her shoulder. His expression was unreadable. "How did it happen?" This was the moment. This was where I had to decide. "I fell," I heard myself say. "At home. Tripped over the rug in the hallway and tried to catch myself. Stupid, really." Derek's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Relief? Satisfaction? "That old rug," Melissa said, pulling back to look at me. "Mom, I've been telling you to replace it for years. It's a hazard." "I know, sweetheart. You were right." "Let's get you home," Derek said, standing up and placing his hand on the small of Melissa's back. "You shouldn't be alone right now, Catherine. We'll stay with you tonight." Every fiber of my being wanted to refuse, but Melissa was already nodding, already planning. "Yes, of course. We'll stay as long as you need us. I can take a few days off from classes." "No," I said, too quickly. Both of them looked at me with surprise. I softened my tone. "No, honey, that's not necessary. It's just a broken arm, not a life-threatening injury. I'll be fine on my own." "But Mom—" "I insist," I said firmly. "You have midterms coming up. I won't have you jeopardizing your education for this." Derek's hand tightened on Melissa's back. I saw her wince slightly. "Your mother's right, Mel. She's a tough woman, always has been. If she says she's fine, we should respect that." He wanted me alone. Of course he did. "At least let us get you settled at home," Melissa pleaded. "Make sure you have everything you need." I couldn't refuse that without raising suspicion, so I nodded. "All right, but then you're heading back to campus." The drive home was torture. Derek insisted on driving my car while Melissa sat in the back with me, holding my good hand and chattering nervously about everything and nothing. I watched the back of Derek's head, watched his eyes in the rearview mirror as he occasionally glanced back at us. 3 months ago, he'd been in the same car, in this same driver's seat. But that time, Melissa hadn't been with us. That time, when I confronted him about what I'd seen, the text messages on his phone that Melissa had accidentally shown me while scrolling through photos, the messages from a girl named Ashley with heart emojis and promises of next time, he'd been very different. That time, he'd grabbed my wrist so hard I'd had bruises for a week. That time, he'd backed me against my own kitchen counter and told me in a voice like ice that if I ever said anything to Melissa about his private conversations, I would regret it. That time, I'd seen the man my daughter had married, and it had terrified me. But I kept quiet because Melissa loved him, because she seemed so happy. Because I convinced myself that maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe I was being an overprotective mother who couldn't let her baby girl go. Until today. Today, he'd come to my house unannounced. Today, he'd asked if I'd considered keeping my mouth shut. Today, when I told him I was thinking of talking to Melissa anyway, that she deserved to know the truth, he grabbed my arm and twisted. I heard the snap before I felt the pain. And Derek stood there watching me crumble to the floor and said, "Looks like you fell. Better be more careful, Catherine. Next time might be worse." Then he left. I'd waited 20 minutes crying on my kitchen floor before I'd managed to call a taxi to take me to the hospital. Now here he was, playing the concerned son-in-law, helping me into my house, his hand gentle on my elbow as Melissa fussed around me. "Sit down, Mom. I'll make you some tea." "I'll help," Derek said, following her into the kitchen. I sat in my living room chair, my broken arm throbbing, and listened to them talk in low voices. I couldn't make out the words, but I heard Melissa's worried tone and Derek's reassuring murmurs.
He was good, I'd give him that. He was very, very good at playing the role. They emerged a few minutes later, Melissa carrying a cup of chamomile tea, Derek with a glass of water and my pain medication. The discharge paper said to take one every 6 hours, he said, shaking out a pill, for the pain. I took it from his hand, careful not to let our fingers touch, and swallowed it with the water. "Thank you," I said automatically. "Of course." He smiled at me, warm and genuine. Family takes care of family. I wanted to throw the water in his face. Instead, I smiled back. Melissa sat with me for another hour, making sure I had everything within reach, setting up pillows to prop my arm, bringing me a sandwich even though I wasn't hungry. Derek watched it all, scrolling through his phone, occasionally making a comment or a suggestion. Finally, as the sun was setting, I convinced them to leave. "I'm exhausted," I said truthfully. "I just need to sleep. Please, go home. I'll call you tomorrow." Melissa hugged me carefully. "Promise you'll call if you need anything. Anything at all." "I promise, sweetheart." Derek hugged me too, and as he did, he whispered in my ear so quietly that Melissa couldn't possibly hear, "Good girl." I stood at the door and watched them drive away in Derek's car, Melissa waving from the passenger window. Then I closed the door, locked it, and allowed myself to cry. 3 days passed. 3 days of Melissa calling twice a day to check on me, of managing one-handed, of the constant throbbing pain in my arm that the medication only dulled. 3 days of thinking, planning, trying to figure out what to do. I couldn't go to the police. It was his word against mine, and I'd already told the hospital I fell. I'd lied on official medical documents, and even if they believed me, what then? A restraining order? Derek would know I'd talked, and he'd turn it around somehow, make me look like a bitter mother-in-law trying to ruin her daughter's marriage. Worse, Melissa would have to choose between believing her mother or her husband, and I wasn't sure which she would choose. On the 4th day, as I was struggling to make coffee one-handed, my doorbell rang. I froze. Derek had come by himself before. Would he do it again? But when I checked the peephole, it wasn't Derek standing on my porch. It was my sister, Diane. I opened the door, and Diane took one look at me, my cast, my unwashed hair, the circles under my eyes, and pushed past me into the house. Jesus Christ, Katie, you look like hell. Nice to see you too, Di. Melissa called me, said you broke your arm but wouldn't let her help you, said you've been weird on the phone. She turned to face me, her hands on her hips. At 48, Diane was 5 years older than me and had never been one to mince words. What's really going on? I fell. It's not a big deal. Bullshit. Diane walked past me into the kitchen, saw the coffee maker I'd been struggling with, and took over. You want to try again? I could feel the tears building behind my eyes. I'd held it together for days, but there was something about Diane, about the way she'd always been able to see right through me, that made it impossible to keep lying. Di, I whispered, I think I made a terrible mistake. She turned around, her expression shifting from annoyed to concerned in an instant. What kind of mistake? And I told her everything, about the text messages, about confronting Derek, about his threat, about coming back and breaking my arm when I said I was going to tell Melissa anyway. By the time I finished, Diane's face was white with rage. That son of a bitch. We're calling the police right now. No, I said quickly. Di, I can't. I lied to the hospital and Melissa married an abusive psychopath. She doesn't know that. She thinks he's perfect. She's happy, or at least she thinks she is. I sank into a kitchen chair. I've forgotten if she knows about Esmerin. I don't know if there's been any conversation about it from the beginning of the book. So if she has an expectation that Esmerin is coming, then I could send postcards from Esmerin. Diana pulled 2 cups of coffee, added sugar to both, and sat down across from me. Okay, she said finally. Then we need proof. Proof? You said you saw text messages. Does Melissa still have them? I don't know. It was months ago before the wedding, and they were on his phone, not hers. What about this Ashley girl? Can we find her? I shook my head. I only saw a first name. I don't know who she is. Diane drummed her fingers on the table, thinking. What does Derek do for work? He's in sales, some kind of pharmaceutical sales, I think. So he travels? Sometimes. Why? Because men like Derek, who are willing to hurt their mother-in-law to keep their wife in the dark, are hiding more than one secret. Diane pulled out her phone. What's his last name again? Fucking Morrison. No, wait. Melissa took his name. What was it before? Sutton. Derek Sutton. Diane's fingers flew across her phone screen. Let me do some digging. In the meantime, we need to make sure you're safe. You're coming to stay with me. I can't just... Yes, you can. You'll tell Melissa you don't want to be alone while you recover. It's perfectly reasonable. She looked up from her phone. And it keeps you away from Derek. She was right. I knew she was right, but the thought of lying to Melissa more, of letting this deception grow... It's temporary, Diane said, reading my expression. Just until we figure this out. Katie, he broke your arm. Who knows what he'll do next if he thinks you're still a threat? That decided it. I packed a bag, left a message for Melissa explaining I was staying with Aunt Diane for a while, and let my sister drive me to her condo across town. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. Diane's spare bedroom was small but comfortable, decorated in shades of cream and sage green. I settled in while she made phone calls in the other room, her voice too low for me to make out the words. When she emerged an hour later, she had a notepad covered in her cramped handwriting. Derek Sutton, she said, sitting on the edge of the bed, 30 years old, works for Marlowe Pharmaceuticals, then with the company for 4 years. Before that, he worked for 2 other pharmaceutical companies, both of which he left after less than 2 years. How did you find all that? LinkedIn, Diane said dryly. Amazing what people put on the internet. Now, here's where it gets interesting. I called a friend of mine who works in HR at a hospital, asked her if she'd ever heard of Derek or his company. She hadn't, but she made some calls.
She consulted her notes. Derek has a reputation in the industry, not a good one. There are rumors, just rumors, nothing proven, that he's been involved in some ethically questionable sales practices, offering kickbacks, falsifying reports, that kind of thing. Nothing that stuck, but enough that he's had to move around. Jesus, I breathed. There's more. My friend found someone who used to work with Derek at his first company. She didn't want to go on record, but she was willing to talk off the record. She said Derek dated a coworker there, a young woman fresh out of college, said the relationship seemed great at first, but then the girl started showing up to work with bruises. When someone asked her about it, Derek suddenly transferred to a different region, and the girl quit shortly after. My stomach turned. Did your friend get a name? She's working on it, but Katie, this is a pattern. Derek's done this before. Melissa doesn't have bruises, I said quietly. I've never seen anything that would suggest he's hurt her. Not yet, Diane said grimly. But you saw those texts. He's cheating on her, or at least trying to, and he was willing to break your arm to keep his secret. It's only a matter of time before he escalates with her, too. I closed my eyes, feeling sick. My daughter, my sweet, smart, beautiful daughter, had married a monster. We need to find out who Ashley is. If we can prove he's cheating, Melissa might believe us. It's not the same as proving he hurt me, but it's something. Agreed. Do you know his email, his social media passwords? No, and Melissa wouldn't give them to me without asking why I wanted them. Diane tapped her pen against the notepad. Does Melissa have access to his accounts? Maybe. I don't know. They live together, so possibly? Okay, here's what we're going to do. You're going to call Melissa and have a normal mother-daughter conversation. You're going to ask about her day, her classes, whatever. And you're going to casually mention that you've been thinking about wedding photos, maybe wanting to get some printed and framed. We already have wedding photos. She doesn't know what you have and haven't gotten printed. You're going to say you remember she showed you some on Derek's phone that day, the day you saw the texts, and you wanted to know if she could send them to you. I saw where she was going. If she still has access to his phone, she might look through it to find the photos, and she might see something she's not supposed to see. It felt manipulative. It felt wrong. It also felt like the only option we had. I made the call that evening. Melissa answered on the second ring, happy to hear from me. Mom, how are you feeling? Is Aunt Diane taking good care of you? She's feeding me too much, I said, forcing lightness into my voice. You know how she is. Melissa laughed. I really can laugh. I can drive down this weekend to visit if you want. No, I'm fine. Actually, I was calling because I've been thinking about the wedding. The wedding? Melissa's tone was puzzled. What about it? I've been looking at the photos and I realized I never got around to printing some of my favorites. Remember that day you came over and showed me some from Derek's phone? The day you saw the texts? There were a few beautiful ones of you two during the ceremony that weren't in the official album. Oh yeah, I think I remember. I can ask Derek to send them to me. Is he there now? No, he's on a business trip. Won't be back until Friday. Perfect. Well, if you have his passcode, maybe you could just grab them yourself. I'd love to get them printed while I'm laid up and have the time. Sure, I can do that. Let me look tonight and I'll send them over. You're a sweetheart. How are classes going? We talked for another 20 minutes about her studies, her friends, the new coffee shop that had opened near campus. Normal mother-daughter conversation. The whole time, my heart was pounding, thinking about what Melissa might find when she looked through Derek's phone. If he was still texting Ashley, if there was evidence, if Melissa would see it. After we hung up, Diane raised her eyebrow at me. Now we wait. We didn't have to wait long. At 11:47 p.m., my phone rang. Melissa's name flashed on the screen. I answered immediately. Melissa? Crying. She was crying so hard she could barely speak. Mom, I need you, she gasped out between sobs. Mom, what's wrong? What happened? Can I come there? To Aunt Diane's? I can't be here right now. Of course, baby, of course. Come right now. Do you want me to come get you? No, I can drive. I need to get out of here. She hung up. I looked at Diane. She's coming. She found something? Yes. We sat on Diane's couch, Melissa between us, while she showed us what she'd found. Messages. Dozens of them. Not just with Ashley, but with 3 other women. Explicit photos, promises to leave his boring wife once he'd secured her family money, which was laughable since I was a middle-class widow with a teacher's pension. Hardly the fortune Derek seemed to think we had. Plans to meet up during his business trips. Messages from as recently as 2 days ago. I looked for the wedding photos, Melissa said, her voice shaking. I was looking through his camera roll and I saw a notification pop up from someone named Pharmacy Contact, which I thought was weird, but I opened the message thread and she broke off, fresh tears streaming down her face. Her name is Amanda. She works at a hospital in Springfield. He's been seeing her for 3 months. There are messages where he talks about me, about how I'm convenient but not exciting like she is. I felt rage building in my chest, hot and fierce, not just for what he'd done to me, but for what he was doing to my daughter. There are others, Melissa continued. Ashley is real. She's a bartender at some hotel he stays at for conferences. There's a Jennifer, a Rachel. Mom, how did I not see this? How was I so stupid? You're not stupid, I said firmly. He's a liar and a manipulator. This is not your fault. I married him. I should have seen. There must have been signs. Men like Derek are very good at hiding who they really are. Trust me, honey, you're not the first smart woman to be fooled by a charming sociopath. Melissa wiped her eyes. I'm leaving him. I'm filing for divorce. Good, I said. You deserve so much better than this. I can't believe this is happening. 6 months. We've been married for 6 months, and he's been doing this the entire time. She looked at me, her eyes desperate. Did you know? Did you suspect something? This was the moment. I could tell her the truth. About the texts I'd seen, about confronting Derek, about what he'd done to my arm. But looking at her devastated face, I couldn't add to her pain. Not tonight. Tonight, she needed comfort, not more betrayal. I knew something was off, I said carefully. I didn't have proof, but I had a feeling. I'm sorry I didn't say anything. What could you have said? I was so in love with him, I wouldn't have believed you. She laughed bitterly. I probably would have been angry at you for suggesting it. She wasn't wrong. What matters now is what you do next, Diane said. You need a good divorce lawyer. You need to document everything on that phone, take screenshots, back them up somewhere he can't access. And you need to get your important documents and belongings out of the apartment before he knows you know. He's not back until Friday, Melissa said. I could go tomorrow, pack everything up. We'll go with you, I said. All 3 of us. We'll get you out of there. Melissa nodded, then leaned her head on my shoulder, carefully, mindful of my cast. I'm sorry, Mom. For what, sweetheart? For not listening when you probably had concerns? For being so wrapped up in my relationship that I didn't even ask how you broke your arm? For stop, I said gently. You have nothing to apologize for. Nothing. You're my daughter, and I love you. And the only thing that matters to me is that you're safe and you're going to be okay. She cried herself to sleep on Diane's couch that night, and we covered her with the blanket and let her rest. In the kitchen, Diane looked at me. Are you going to tell her the truth about what he did to you? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me thinks she deserves to know what kind of man she married,
but part of me thinks it'll only hurt her more. If you decide to press charges, she'll find out anyway. I know. Diane was quiet for a moment. There's another option. What? I'm suggesting that Derek Sutton has made a lot of enemies. Bad business practices, woman he's hurt or used. What if all of that came to light? What if his employer found out? What if his future employers found out? I'm not talking about anything illegal. I'm talking about making sure the truth is known. All of it. Let him face the consequences of his own actions. It was tempting. God, it was tempting. Let me think about it, I said finally. We didn't have much time to think. The next morning, as the three of us were planning the move out of Melissa's apartment, my phone rang. Derek. I stared at the screen, my heart racing. Don't answer it, Diane said. But Melissa was looking at the phone too. That's Derek. Why is he calling you? I don't know, I said honestly. Answer it, Melissa said, her voice hard. Put it on speaker. I did. Catherine, Derek's voice was smooth as ever. How are you feeling? I wanted to check in on you, see if you needed anything. I'm fine, Derek. Diane's taking good care of me. Good. Listen, I was calling because I can't seem to reach Melissa. Her phone is going straight to voicemail. You haven't heard from her, have you? Melissa's eyes widened. She turned her phone off last night and hadn't turned it back on. No, I lied. I haven't. That's strange. She usually answers. She hasn't said anything to you, has she? About us? About any problems? My blood ran cold. He knew. Somehow he knew. What kind of problems would she be having? I asked carefully. Oh, you know how marriage is. Adjustments. Little disagreements. I just want to make sure my wife isn't saying anything that might worry her mother unnecessarily. The threat was clear. Don't believe anything she tells you. Melissa's hands were clenched into fists. If Melissa had concerns about her marriage, I'm sure she'd talk to you first. Of course. Well, if you do hear from her, tell her to call me. I'm cutting my trip short to come home early. I miss my wife. He hung up. He knows, Melissa whispered. How does he know? He doesn't know for sure, Diane said, but he's suspicious. Maybe he has some kind of tracking app on her phone so that you weren't at the apartment. Or he remotely checks his phone records and saw that you accessed his messages. We need to move fast, Diane said. If he's coming back early? I want to be there when he arrives, Melissa said suddenly. What? I want to face him. I want to see his face when I tell him I know everything. Her expression was fierce. I want him to know that he didn't get away with it. I understood that need. I'd felt it myself, the desire to confront Derek, to not let him have the last word. But I also knew how dangerous he could be. If you're going to do this, I said slowly, we do it smart. We pack up your essentials first. We get them out of there. Then if you want to confront him, you do it in a public place with both of us there, not alone, never alone. Melissa nodded. Okay, yes, that makes sense. We spent the rest of the morning packing up Melissa's things from the apartment she'd shared with Derek. Clothes, documents, laptop, jewelry, photo albums, everything that was hers, everything that mattered. We loaded it into Diane's SUV and my car, making 2 trips to get it all to a storage unit Diane rented on the spot. By early afternoon, Melissa's possessions were secured, and we were back at Diane's condo, planning the confrontation. I'll text him, Melissa said. Tell him I want to meet for dinner, somewhere public. And say what? That we need to talk, that I have something important to discuss. She looked at her phone. He's been calling and texting all day. Lots of, where are you, and I'm worried about you, messages. Classic abuser behavior, Diane muttered, pretending to be concerned while actually trying to control. Melissa typed out a message and hit send. The response came back in less than a minute. Of course, baby. I've been so worried. Where do you want to meet?
Melissa named a restaurant near the university, a place that would be busy on a Thursday evening. 7 p.m., she typed. I'll be there. I love you. She stared at that last message for a long moment before turning off her phone screen. We'll get there early, I said. Get a table nearby where we can see and hear everything. And I'm calling in reinforcements, Diane said, pulling out her own phone. Who? My friend Marcus. He's a cop, off duty, just there as a friend, but someone Derek doesn't know who can intervene if things go south. Die. I'm not talking about anything illegal. I'm talking about making sure the truth is known. All of it. Let him face the consequences of his own actions. It was tempting. God, it was tempting. Let me think about it, I said finally.
Morelli's Italian restaurant was, as predicted, busy when we arrived at 6:30. Diane's friend Marcus was already there, sitting at the bar with a clear view of the dining room. He was a big man, the kind whose presence alone was reassuring. We got a table on the opposite side of the restaurant from where Melissa would be sitting, close enough to intervene if needed, far enough not to be immediately obvious. At 6:50, Melissa arrived. She changed into jeans and a simple sweater, pulled her hair back. She looked tired, but determined. At 6:55, Derek walked in. Even from across the restaurant, I could see his charm offensive. He spotted Melissa, and his face lit up with what looked like genuine relief and joy. He hurried to the table, tried to hug her, looked confused when she remained seated and didn't return the embrace. He sat down across from her, reaching for her hand across the table. She pulled back. We couldn't hear the conversation, but we could see it. Derek's concerned expression, Melissa's stiff posture, his increasingly agitated gestures. Then Melissa pulled out her phone and showed him something on the screen. The change in Derek's demeanor was instantaneous. The mask dropped. His face went cold, hard. He reached across the table and grabbed her wrist, the same way he'd grabbed mine. I was halfway out of my seat before I even realized I was moving. But Marcus was faster. He was at their table in seconds, his hand on Derek's shoulder. Sir, I'm going to need you to let go of the lady. Derek released Melissa's wrist and looked up at Marcus. This is a private conversation between me and my wife. Your wife who you were physically restraining, Marcus said, calmly. Let's keep this civil. People were starting to stare. Derek was aware of it. I could see him calculating, trying to figure out how to spin this. There's been a misunderstanding, Derek said, his voice carrying. My wife is upset. She's not thinking clearly. I'm thinking very clearly. I'm thinking that you've been cheating on me with multiple women. I'm thinking that you married me under false pretenses. I'm thinking that I want a divorce. The restaurant had gone quiet. Everyone was watching now. Derek's face flushed. Melissa, please, can we discuss this privately? No, she said firmly. We can discuss it through lawyers. I've already contacted one. You'll be getting papers next week. You're making a mistake, Derek said, and there was an edge to his voice now, a hint of the man behind the mask. You're throwing away our marriage over some misunderstanding. I saw the messages, Derek. All of them. Amanda, Ashley, Jennifer, Rachel. Should I keep going? He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. You're being paranoid. The man who's been texting, I can't wait to leave my boring wife, is calling me paranoid? I'm done. We're done. Don't contact me. Don't come to Aunt Diane's looking for me. Don't call my mother. You'll hear from my lawyer. She turned to walk away, and Derek grabbed her arm again. This time, both Marcus and I moved. Marcus's hand locked onto Derek's wrist. I strongly suggest you let go. Derek looked at Marcus, then looked past him and saw me standing there. Something flickered across his face. Calculation, then decision. He said, Catherine, please, talk to your daughter. I don't know what she thinks she saw, but this is all a misunderstanding. Tell her, I know what you are, I said quietly.
I've known for months." His expression changed again. "What did you tell her?" "Nothing she didn't figure out herself." "You vindictive bitch. You couldn't stand to see her happy, could you? You had to poison her against me." "You poisoned her against you. With your lies, your cheating, your—" "Careful," Derek said, and his voice was cold. "Be very careful what you accuse me of, Catherine. Especially in public." He was threatening me. Even now, even here, he was threatening me. "Did you know that Derek broke my arm?" Melissa's head whipped around. "What?" "That's a lie," Derek said immediately. "She fell. She told the hospital she fell." "I lied," I said, looking at my daughter. "I lied because he threatened me, because he said if I told you the truth about his affairs, it would be worse next time. He came to my house, he grabbed my arm, and he broke it to teach me a lesson about keeping quiet." The restaurant was dead silent now. Melissa's face had gone white. "Mom?" "It's true, sweetheart. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I was trying to protect you." "This is slander," Derek snarled. "You have no proof." "Actually," Diane's voice cut across the room as she approached with her phone out, "we have quite a bit of proof. Funny thing about your reputation, Derek. Once one person starts talking, others feel brave enough to share their stories too." "What? Remember a woman named Jennifer Hollis from your first pharmaceutical job? She was very interested to hear that you were married, since you told her you were single when you were dating her, and very willing to talk about how you broke her wrist when she tried to break up with you." Derek's face drained of color. "And then there's Amanda from Springfield, the one you're currently seeing. I gave her a call this afternoon, let her know you were married. She was shocked, horrified actually, especially when I mentioned you had a history of violence. She was happy to provide screenshots of your conversations, very detailed conversations. You can't—" "Oh, and your employer," Diane said conversationally. "Marlowe Pharmaceuticals. They were very interested to hear about the kickbacks you've been offering to doctors. Amazing what people will tell you when you're just asking friendly questions." Derek looked around wildly, like a trapped animal. Marcus's hand was still on his shoulder, keeping him in place. "You've been busy destroying your own life," I said to Derek. "We just made sure the truth came out." "You'll regret this," Derek said, his voice shaking with rage. "All of you. I'll sue you for defamation, for harassment." "Please do," Diane said. "Discovery will be fun. We have so much to share." Melissa was crying, but she walked up to Derek, and with Marcus still holding him in place, she looked him in the eye. "You're a monster. And I'm glad I found out now instead of years from now. I'm glad I didn't have children with you. I'm glad I get to walk away." She took off her wedding ring and set it on the table. "We're done. Don't ever contact me or my family again." Then she turned and walked out of the restaurant, her head held high. I followed her, with Diane right behind me. Behind us, I could hear Derek shouting, could hear Marcus's calm voice telling him it was time to leave, could hear the restaurant manager getting involved, but I didn't look back. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in March, exactly 1 year after Derek and Melissa had gotten married. Melissa stood on the courthouse steps in the spring sunshine, the final decree in her hands, and breathed deeply. "It's over," she said. "It's over," I agreed. We went to lunch to celebrate, Melissa, Diane, and me. My cast had come off months ago, though my wrist still ached sometimes when it rained. Melissa said it was the same with her heart. Most days she was fine, but sometimes the betrayal still hurt. She'd gone back to school, thrown herself into her studies. She'd started seeing a therapist to work through the trauma of realizing she'd married someone who wasn't who she'd pretended to be. She was healing, slowly but surely. As for Derek,
His life had unraveled spectacularly. Marlowe Pharmaceuticals had fired him after an investigation confirmed the kickback allegations. His professional reputation was destroyed. No one in the pharmaceutical industry would hire him. Jennifer Hollis had filed a police report about what he'd done to her, and while the statute of limitations had passed for prosecution, it was on record. I'd decided not to press charges for what he'd done to me. My lawyer explained that with my initial false statement to the hospital, it would be difficult to prove and the stress of a trial might not be worth it. Instead, I'd gotten a restraining order. Derek wasn't allowed within 500 feet of me, Melissa, or Diane. He'd violated it once, showing up at my house to explain himself. The police had been called, and he'd spent a night in jail. He hadn't tried again. Last we'd heard, he'd moved to a different state, working some dead-end job, his charm and good looks not enough to rebuild the life he'd destroyed. "How are you doing, Mom?" Melissa asked me as we waited for our food. "Really? Really?" I considered. "I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. I have my daughter back. I have my sister. I have my life. Derek took a lot from me, but he didn't take everything." "I'm sorry, Mom," Melissa said quietly, "for not believing you sooner, for defending him." "Honey, we've talked about this." "I know, but I need to say it again. You tried to protect me, and he hurt you for it, and I had no idea. I was so blind. You were in love, or you thought you were. There's no shame in that. I should have seen the signs. There's a reason people like Derek are successful at what they do. They're good at hiding their true selves. They're good at manipulation. You're not stupid or blind for falling for it. You're human." Melissa nodded, wiping her eyes. "I know. My therapist says the same thing. It just still feels like I should have known. What matters is that you got out, that when you saw the truth, you were brave enough to walk away. That took strength, Melissa." She smiled slightly. "I learned from the best." We ate lunch, talked about lighter things, Melissa's plans for summer, Diane's new boyfriend, my garden that was finally starting to bloom after the long winter. As we were leaving, Melissa linked her arm through mine. "Mom," she said, "thank you." "For what?" "For not giving up on me, for protecting me even when I didn't know I needed protecting, for being my mom." I kissed her forehead. "Always, baby. Always." We walked out into the spring sunshine, 3 women who had been broken and had healed stronger than before. Derek had taught us a lesson, all right. He'd taught us that we were stronger than he'd ever given us credit for, that the truth always comes out eventually, and that the women he'd underestimated were the ones who'd brought him down. I was in my garden planting tomatoes when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer. "Catherine Morrison?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes." "My name is Sarah Chen. I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from Diane. She said you might be willing to talk to me." "About what?" "About Derek Sutton." I sat down on my garden bench. "I'm listening." "I'm an investigative journalist. I'd been working on a story about abuse and manipulation in professional settings, and Derek's name came up. Diane mentioned that you and your daughter had experiences with him." "We did." "Would you be willing to be interviewed? Not for anything sensational. I'm not interested in exploitation. But I think Derek's story is part of a larger pattern,
And I think it's important for people to understand how men like him operate. I thought about it. Thought about Melissa, who had rebuilt her life and was thriving now, engaged to a kind man who treated her with respect. Thought about Jennifer Hollis and the other women Derek had heard. Thought about my broken arm and the fear I'd felt. "Yes," I said, "I'll talk to you, but not just me. You need to talk to my daughter, too, and to Jennifer Hollis, and to any other women you can find. This isn't just my story or Melissa's story. It's all of our stories." "I agree completely." "Thank you, Catherine." 6 months later, the article came out in a major national magazine. "The Charming Monster: How One Man's Pattern of Abuse Went Unchecked for Years." It featured interviews with me, Melissa, Jennifer, and 3 other women who came forward after hearing about the article. It detailed Derek's history of manipulation, abuse, and fraud. It talked about the systems that had failed to stop him, the warning signs that had been ignored, the women who had been brave enough to speak up. The article went viral. Derek, living in obscurity in another state, suddenly found himself in the spotlight again. This time, there was no charm offensive that could save him. This time, the truth was out there for everyone to see. I didn't take any pleasure in his downfall. I didn't celebrate his suffering, but I was glad that his victims, all of us, had our voices heard. And I was proud that Melissa and I had turned our pain into purpose, our trauma into testimony. Derek had taught her a lesson, my daughter had said that day in the hospital, but in the end, we'd taught him one too.